Good morning and welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk Radio. The day is upon us, ladies and gentlemen. We need to hear what's going on. I found myself on a crowded train this morning, more crowded than it was yesterday, more crowded on the escalators than it was yesterday, more people walking around in the streets, more people going in and out of shops, more people not wearing masks as they walk down the street. The weather's very nice today. It's a little bit on the chilly side, but still, the sun is shining. There'll be loads of people out and about. I was in a restaurant yesterday afternoon, which wasn't particularly busy, but that's because they can't open the restaurant inside yet. But I've seen lots of people crowding around outside of pubs, lots of people, I think, getting ready for the summer, lots of people getting ready for the next set of relaxation of the lockdown, which is going to happen in a couple of weeks' time, just over May the 17th, of course. We've got much to talk about in this hour. Helen Dale joins us. She's a writer, she's a lawyer, she's a political commentator. She's got much to say about this move by Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, to get rid of that ridiculous idea the police had, which was that if you had said something which someone thought to be hateful, you could be reported to the police for it, and even though it wasn't a crime, they could still record it and they could keep it on file, and it could even jeopardise your chances of getting a job. That doesn't seem fair, does it? 0344 499 1000. If it's happened to you, we'd love to hear from you. We're also talking, of course, still about why on earth Boris Johnson is getting himself embroiled in this ridiculous curtain gate scenario, cash for curtains as some people are calling it, where he spent loads and loads of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds possibly, on redecorating Downing Street when it didn't necessarily need redecorating. They just didn't really like the way it looked. But he won't tell anyone who paid for it. He says he's now paid for it, but he won't say who paid for it up front. I don't know why he's doing this, because he's getting himself further and further into a rabbit hole. It now appears the Electoral Commission are investigating because they think a crime may have been committed. They're going to be seeking all of his private emails and all of Carrie Simon's private emails. Does he really want to give those up just because he's being stubborn? 0344 499 1000. Will Geddes joins us as well, coming up with a big story about Google and your privacy. You're listening to me, Mike Graham, right here on the fastest growing radio station on the planet. It is, of course, Talk Radio.
Mid-morning with Mike Graham. Talk Radio.
Now, let us, without further ado, go and speak to Helen Dale. Helen, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. I'm puzzled about this Priti Patel hate incident story, because I've never really thought there was any business of the police's to investigate something which was not a crime and then record it as not being a crime, and then tell you that they've recorded it, that you haven't committed a crime, but nevertheless you have in some way been involved in a hate incident. Now, you know a thing or two about this, don't you?
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. The hate crime operational guidance, which is what it used to be called, they've changed the name. It's now been, and I actually had to write this down because they've done this deliberately to avoid the fact, so it's not easy to talk about in public like we are here. It's now the authorised professional practice guidance on hate crime.
Excellent.
And it was supposedly in response to the finding in the Miller case at first instance in the High Court, where Justice Knowles in Miller against Miller and College of Policing basically blew the police up for misusing their own guidance.
Yes, we spoke. This is Harry Miller, who we spoke to from at the start of this week.
Yes. Now, the thing that Justice Knowles and the High Court were very angry about was the fact that the police went to Miller's place of work and told him they wanted to check his thinking. And this was over him being rude and funny. He is quite funny. He's a very funny man.
He is, he's what we used to call in this country irreverent.
Yes, being funny about Stonewall on Twitter and writing spicy limericks, although apparently the one that was complained about wasn't actually one of his. It was a retweet from somebody else.
Yes, I remember, yeah.
So basically the ruling there was that the guidance was legitimate but had been applied improperly. But now, since then, a lot more information has come out, largely through the organisation that Harry Miller founded, We Are Fair Cop, but also through lots and lots of other people going through this process. And we've now got some statistics. There's been about 120,000, give or take a few thousand, of these since they were introduced. These non-crime hate incidents. They weren't introduced until 2014, and so people who are saying that it's as a response to the Macpherson report are absolutely talking out of their hat, because the Macpherson report was a long time ago. Yeah. So I fell for that, and I'm a lawyer myself. So, so fair cop and barrister Sarah Filmore, who's been a victim of one of these, have done a lot of very, very good work here to research this. And so has the Free Speech Union. And probably the figure to keep in your head is that non-crime hate incidents are being recorded at a rate of 66 per day. Now, they have their roots in this idea of perception-based policing, which means the alleged victim gets to define the crime or the incident, which of course is nonsense. I mean, the law depends enormously on the idea of an objective test, and it also depends enormously on the idea that the burden of proof is on the propounder. That is the basis of the presumption of innocence. Now, Sarah Filmore, like Harry Miller, was originally tangled up with this, and she's a barrister, as a result of the transgender debate and people behaving ridiculously on Twitter. But she then decided, well, let's just see how ridiculous this is. So she put out a tweet that said, I think my cat's a Methodist.
Right.
And she got a colleague, another barrister, I think, to report this to the police.
Yeah.
And the police actually asked this gentleman what they thought was why he thought it was hateful, and he said, "Well, Sarah Filmore is implying that Methodists are wandering pests who defecate in people's gardens."
Sorry, I mean, I presume at this point the police didn't laugh.
No, they didn't. Although she has since been told, oh no, we didn't bother to record that one. But the gentleman who made the complaint was told in all sincerity at the time that the police had recorded it. Now, the thing you've got to remember here is Filmore is a barrister. Like me, she knows who to ask, where to go, how to make the arrangements necessary to find out what information the state has on you or has about a particular thing. I mean, I've had this experience quite a lot. People often are completely flummoxed when they first encounter freedom of information.
Yes.
And I've had situations where friends of mine have said, I want to do an FOI, and I'm not a information specialist. It's not an area of the law I've ever worked in, but it's very clear that when you do it, it's set up to make it hard for ordinary members of the public to do. So they finish up having to ask a solicitor to help them, which is ridiculous.
I mean, the whole FOI process was set up as a means of obfuscating the truth and obfuscating and making it difficult for people to find what the truth was, because you it's one of those things where the authorities look like they've done something helpful and they haven't really. They've actually made it harder. Yes.
Now, for ordinary members of the public, if you're not Sarah Filmore, if you're not me, if you're not Harry Miller, you might be a stevedore now, but he used to be a policeman, don't actually know that these non-crime hate incidents have been entered on their record.
Well, funnily enough, when I was talking to Harry about this, I asked him if he knew what the kind of parameters were for one of these incidents to be recorded, and he didn't know, and he said he didn't think the police knew either, and he also didn't think.
I think he's quite right.
And I think he didn't also, and he said he didn't think the police also knew even what the parameters were of what hate crime actually is.
And so you've now produced a situation where very often people find out about the existence of one of these when there is an enhanced DBS check, as there is for a number of jobs, particularly any occupation that involves working with children.
Yes. When
there is an enhanced DBS check, which is the Disclosure and Barring Service, by the way, I should make sure I spell these things out for non-lawyers.
Yes.
And they find they can't get a job as a teacher, a police officer, a carer, particularly. I mean, it's not just the carers who go into people's homes, but the more senior carer who, for example, I mean, my partner's mother is currently going through the whole caring process at the moment, and there is a more senior carer. Often these are people with social work or nursing backgrounds, and they find that they haven't been able to get work because an ordinary member of the public, and Harry Miller actually did a very, very good interview with a chap called Peter Whittle, as a journalist in London, where he got his document. He holds it up in the interview. You can buy it, look at it on YouTube, and it's your criminal record. And the thing is, you have to go all the way down the bottom of the rotten thing before you find out that it's a non-crime hate incident. Which, if you're not a lawyer, if you're not a police officer, if you're not someone with some experience, work for a citizens advice bureau or something like that, of these things, that it's just confusing.
It is. And is it something that you can access as a citizen of this country? Can you
Yes,
demand,
it is. You can
demand to see it, can't you?
You can demand to see it, but you have to know. You know, and I mean, one of the reasons I'm describing this process is so ordinary members of the public know. Now, I haven't been in practice since the middle of 2016. I'm retired. But I do wonder, because most of my Twitter feed is cats. But I mean, it's entirely possible, and it has actually happened, for people to make complaints about tweets. It's usually Twitter,
yes,
where there is a link to a piece of journalism. So there are potentially people out there who, when Talk Radio tweets this chat, our chat that we've done out today, or I retweet it, as I often do, or I put a tweet together and then I send it to you and you retweet me. It's entirely possible that both you and I have acquired non-crime hate incidents simply because we have retweeted or tweeted something that both of us do for our jobs on a radio station that is regulated by Ofcom.
But surely, if somebody reports one of your tweets and says that it should be investigated by the police, it might be that they think it's a hate crime initially. It might be the police look at it and decide it's not a hate crime, but instead it's a hate incident. Aren't they required to tell you that they're investigating it?
No.
They're not
allowed to. They're not required to tell you. And there are two other pieces of this, and this is where I'm going to go on to Emma Webb at the Free Speech Union has done some excellent research on this. We've now got a situation where effectively a non-government body, a Quango, the College of Policing, has set this arrangement up, and it was never legislated. So all the people who are saying it came on the back of the Macpherson report are talking nonsense. And because it's not been subject to parliamentary scrutiny, it's got the same characteristics as a lot of the lockdown legislation and a lot of the coronavirus legislation, which is why when the fines, for example, or the fixed penalty notices have been reviewed, they've often been waived simply because of inadequate parliamentary scrutiny. And all Priti Patel can do, and this is where it gets really ridiculous, she's the Home Secretary, she's meant to have oversight of the police. She can ask them to stop doing it.
Yes.
But if she wants them to stop doing it, she's going to have to get legislation drafted and pass it through the Parliament to stop the police engaging in this behaviour. Now, I suspect the threat, her saying, look, you need to stop doing this, is partly to ensure there isn't a really unpleasant debate in the Parliament about it when there's a lot of other things to focus on, like coronavirus, like Carrie Antoinette's curtains and Boris's tendency to bang like a dunny door and be taken in by a pretty face and think with the part of the anatomy that isn't between his ears, all of that. So there's other things going on, but it's also, I suspect, a prophylactic, to continue with the metaphor here, against the courts doing it.
Well, the thing is, I suppose the police individually, as police forces or services, as they're now called, would not wish to see the politicisation of the police. But of course, the stable door, I'm afraid, has already been blown open on that one, because the police are politicised.
And it's not just one horse; all the horses are out in the paddock.
Yeah, they've all gone. But the thing is that over time, generally speaking, I think the Home Secretary, and not just Priti Patel, but any Home Secretary, has always been slightly reticent to instruct them to do stuff.
So effectively, a Quango, without parliamentary scrutiny, is making a lot of people's lives very difficult. And the only way to stop them doing that is for legislation to be passed. And meanwhile, all of this silly nonsense, and you've had people say, oh, well, it'll stop the police gathering intelligence. As Emma Webb at the Free Speech Union points out, the police have always been able to gather intelligence in this way to see this is how the Prevent program works, which you can make arguments about that, but even other kinds of intelligence about whether you think that, for example, conversations of this type where the police investigate them, is it part of organised crime, and so on and so forth. And so what you finished up with is a situation where you have literally an open invitation by the police to waste their time. And meanwhile, if you're a cyclist, good luck reporting that your £3,000 bike has been nicked. and getting them to investigate it.
Yes, well,
as
of course.
friends of mine have experienced.
No, of course, and everybody has a story like that. But I suppose the other thing that's changed the landscape somewhat, Helen, is social media, because people can now write things down which are there forever, whether or not they delete them, on various different platforms, all of which could be potentially criminal. And that's why I think that the whole code needs to be overhauled in this country in terms of what is free speech
A lot
and
of
what can be said. Because I don't even think I'm even very clear. And we had a call and we talked about this the other day from a woman who was involved in an anti-Semitism claim, and she said, it's very clear what anti-Semitism is, and that may well be, but it's not that clear what hate crime is it?
No, or even a hate incident is, and this is the problem we've got of where
we
and
when does a hate incident become a crime?
Yes, this is the problem with the perception-based policing, where we're allowing individuals to define it themselves rather than coming up with an objective test. Now, the law is supposed to come up with objective tests for this, and so you've got wasting of police time. You've got individuals' lives and careers being destroyed. I mean, there have been incidents, for example, where people under the age of 16 have finished up with non-crime hate incidents on their record. Isn't this wonderful? Let's ruin a young person's future.
Right. And we really
have got a problem here.
Yeah, I think so. But presumably, if this instruction, if that's what it is, has been issued by Priti Patel, even though it doesn't appear to have any absolute binding, kind of seriousness, does this mean that now the police will not do it anymore?
I suspect not, because to a degree, like all of the institutions that were sort of subjected to all of that slew of Blairite legislation, which was basically designed to generate institutional capture for a form of quite authoritarian liberal or progressive. I wouldn't even want to say liberal leftism because it's a terrible traducing of liberal ideas, but this kind of progressive activism. And really what needs to be done, and of course coronavirus has stopped it happening despite the Tories making all sorts of promises in their manifesto about doing it, is a great deal of the Blairite legislation simply needs to be repealed. And that includes parts of the Equality Act. They just all of the metrics about how many women or how many minorities you've got working in your business and so on and so forth. This is all nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hire the best person for the job and stop pretending that you can somehow engage in ticker box politics in order to make your company or organisation more profitable. It's just nonsense.
So this is where all of this...
It's not the government's business.
But in a way, this is where all of this wokery leads us, isn't it? Because the wokery will make it impossible for you to, one, have a particular view, two, to then, if you do have that view, face some kind of consequence for having it, three, somehow have some idiot tell you that the view that you've got is in some way hateful. Four, it's then an incident. Five, you might have committed a crime. And that is the clear kind of pathway to madness that I can see.
Well, yes, and Sarah Filmore wrote an excellent piece for The Critic where she pointed out, I think her degree before she studied law must have been in German or German history or something, because she talks about this phenomenon of... and there's a special word for it in German, and I'll probably say it wrongly, called Zersetzung.
Okay.
Which is decomposition. Now, basically, this whole idea of building up a bank of information that could potentially be embarrassing, although it may not be, about individuals, and then using it against them was the standard practice of the Stasi in East Germany.
Yes. And
that's the way they people who were opposed to the East German authoritarian regime, this was the way they were broken down. That Zersetzung word is one of those German compounds that refers to taking people and basically breaking them up and destroying the underlying basis of their character in order to make their lives very, very difficult. And you cannot have it in a liberal democracy, no matter how much it may assuage minorities' feelings. This is something they don't get. And this is one where the majority of the population, which is an overwhelming one, needs to quite crudely say, no, sit down, you've had yours, this is enough.
Exactly. Because in the end, that's the equivalent, isn't it, it's the sort of moral equivalent of going back through somebody's Twitter account and finding something from 5 years ago.
Which is exactly what happened to Sarah Filmore.
Yes.
When she got the reports, she had 17 pages of someone who'd assiduously been reporting all her tweets to the police.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's
just extraordinary.
I mean, to continue with the makeover analogies, it's net curtain twitching of the highest degree. It's sort of Olympic level net curtain twitching, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It feeds into a very negative human characteristic, which is the desire to gossip about one's neighbours.
Yes. And also the
Now,
desire to control what they say, which is rather
and
sinister,
control the
actually.
way other people, yes, and to tell other people how to behave. And if you were properly educated as a child, I mean, and this is certainly something I was brought up with by my parents, I got two rules. One, just because you're clever doesn't mean you get to tell other people how to behave.
Right.
And two, your cleverness might help you run your own life, but don't presume to speak for other people and how to run their lives.
Yes.
You know, in other words, there's a time and a place to keep a still tongue in your head. Now, quite a lot of this nonsense has its roots in the idea, because these kind of silly things are thought up by academics. I mean, normal sane people don't. It's the kind of leather that comes out of the universities, is rooted in the idea that clever people get to tell Joe and Josephine Average how to behave.
Yes. This
Just
is like these
because
people.
they're clever.
This is like these people who voted to remain in the European Union. You know, because
It's
that's
the same
what an
trait.
awful lot of them stand for. And there's also that group of people who think that only clever people. I can't remember what the name is for them, the collective name, but you'll probably know it. For these people who think that only people who are intelligent should be allowed to vote.
Yes, it's an intellectual idea known as epistocracy.
That's it. Yes. And
Yes.
I've seen people actually on Twitter who quite happily proclaim themselves to be epistocracy supporters.
Yes, and it fed into the Brexit debate, the idea that some people are too stupid to vote, and of course when it's purveyed by left-wingers or by liberals, and including by liberal Tories, I have to say, in this case.
Champagne socialists, I call them.
Yeah, they're forgetting that the original arguments against extending the vote to working class men and women in this country, and to working class men, women and black people in the United States, was on the basis that they didn't have enough brains. So this is really, really dangerous and poisonous rhetoric, and it has dreadful history.
Oh, it's ghastly.
And
it really is. But they're
history.
so kind of smug about all of their beliefs, and they only want to hear from other people with the same beliefs. And it's just an appalling state of affairs. And you know, some of the people like AC Grayling and others have never ever moved off that particular high horse. They'll never do it. You know, they'll want to rejoin the EU. They'll want to reform with the European Union. They're not happy.
I feel very sad about what has happened to AC Grayling. I'm a writer myself, and I have been to literary festivals and things where he has been there. And I own and have read many of his books. And he's turned into something very strange. And it's always worse when it's someone you know and admire. That line from Hamlet, what a falling off was there. I mean, the conspiracism and the hate for the dislike of his fellow citizens, or not so much dislike, it's more contempt for his fellow citizens.
It is contempt,
who disagree with him.
Pure and simple contempt. Helen, we're going to leave it there, I'm afraid, because once again, we've run out of time. But thank you very much for your thoughts. Thank you very much for talking to us. We'll talk to you next week. Helen Dale there, writer, lawyer, political commentator. Lots more for us to do here at Talk Radio. We are, of course, live streaming on YouTube, live streaming on Twitter. Get on it. Watch us, because we are Talk Radio, but we are also Talk Radio TV. We'll be back after this.